All right, welcome everybody. This is our third webinar in our week of action on data centers. And tonight we'll be talking about the grid impacts and the air pollution impacts of data centers. And we've had a bunch of people out at the Texas Capitol today to talk on this very issue. I think there were over 200 people signed up to speak at the Senate Business and Commerce Committee. I don't know if they've actually started taking public testimony yet. Looks like not yet. Cyrus is still over there at the Capitol. Hopefully, he'll get to speak, and hopefully, some of the other people from around the state will get to speak. But we'll be diving into some of those issues here today, and then we'll wrap up with a training on how to write a letter to the editor. So, I'm gonna just jump right into it so that we have plenty of time for the presentations and discussion as well. And we're gonna start with Joanne I'm sorry. I should have asked. How do you say your name?
Parkamo. You got
Karkamo.
close.
I got close, and then I just flubbed it. So Joanne is really been on the front lines of this fight and is going to share her experience as the director of Protect the Paluxy Valley. And then we will move into our next two presentations, and I'll introduce those speakers. Joanne?
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm honored to be with you today on behalf of Protect the Paluxy Valley, Inc. And our organization was born out of an urgent necessity to preserve the natural heritage, the public health, water resources, and the rural tranquility of Hood and Somerville counties against unchecked industrial expansion. When we first learned about the gas power plant applications in the Paluxy Valley, we knew that doing nothing was not an option for us. So today I want to share our journey focusing on our grassroots strategy, planning, education, and execution, the deep pollution risk that we fought against, and what our eventual victory means for the future of our community and our organization. So to understand why rural Texas is facing these gas plant proposals, we have to look at the explosive growth of modern technology. Hyperscale AI data centers require around the clock electricity. And so to meet these staggering energy loads without relying on the grid, developers are turning to the co-located natural gas power plants. And like you have probably heard our governor say, the behind the meter, bringing their own power. So the pollution risk, um, I mean, the pollutants that these gas plants emit it's a lot, especially for the rural areas that we are in that are a lot of the times haven't seen any type of industrial um, project. So our position was grounded in the undeniable environmental science behind this, and the pollution risk that posed by the plant of this magnitude was vast. So we were looking at air degradation and toxic emissions. It was a 2 gigawatt gas facility, and it emitted hundreds of tons of nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, volatile organic compounds, and fine particulate matter every single year. So, in terms of ozone precursor emissions, this single facility would have equaled adding over 850,000 vehicles to our local roads. Nitrogen oxides react with heat and the sunlight to form dangerous ground level ozone. So that would trigger, asthma attacks and aggravate cardiovascular disease and harm children and elderly residents in our area. Another factor would be aquifer and river depletion. So that was a huge concern for us. The industrial runoff and wastewater discharge that would threaten the Paluxy River watershed and the Dinosaur Valley State Park. We did have a biologist tell us that just in the construction phase during the building of these proposed data centers and gas plants, the tracks in the Dinosaur Valley State Park uh, could potentially be lost forever. So Protect the Paluxy Valley launched a 3-pillar strategy. It included planning, education, and execution. So we organized legally as a nonprofit, a 501c3, to build and discipline research-driven defense. We engaged legal counsel, engineers, and environmental experts to provide us with fact-based information. Education, we held town halls, published fact sheets, and invited the public to seminars and workshops that we planned. We educated our neighbors on technical permit details so every resident understood exactly how their water, air, and property values were at risk. And then finally, execution, we translated awareness into action. We packed local commissioners' courts, hearings across county lines, both in Hood and Somerville County. And we mobilized citizens to submit over 11,000 public comments in opposition to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality on one of the largest public outpourings in recent state history. And then on June 18th, NRG officially rescinded its TCEQ air quality permit application for the proposed energy Toller facility. And that would, the withdrawal was a monumental victory for us. It proved that a dedicated, well-organized community can successfully defend its natural resources against major industry. And finally, I'm going to end with this. While we do celebrate and are still celebrating the withdrawal of this air permit, our work is far from over. Data center land proposals and infrastructure pressures remain very active in North Texas. Protect the Paluxy Valley, Inc. remains very vigilant, monitoring groundwater applications, advocating for sensible county land use standards, and safeguarding our region. When communities stand united, backed by science and grassroots determination, we can protect what matters most. Thank you, everyone, for your continued support in this fight.
Thank you very much, Joanne. And we will be coming back around for Q&A. So if anybody wants to use the Q&A feature, you can click on the 3 dots at the bottom there where it says more, and you'll get to that. And we will be taking questions for this whole panel after they all get a chance to speak. So next, we're going to switch over to Griffin Bird, who's with the Environmental Integrity Project, or EIP, as you may know them, and he's a research analyst there and is going to be talking about the air pollution impacts across the state from data center power production.
Yeah, thanks so much. As you just heard, my name is Griffin Bird. I'm a research analyst with the Environmental Integrity Project. Like to think of ourselves as America's environmental watchdog. A lot of my work over the past year and a half has involved tracking the power plants that we are seeing proposed for data centers across the country. And as I'm sure folks on this call know, Texas is sort of the epicenter of it, ground zero. We just released a report on this exact subject. My organization did. I was the lead author and researcher on that, and I've got some slides that I'm going to share with everybody. All right, I hope people can see that.
It's up.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm going to just walk through quickly some of the main points from our report, some of the stuff that pertains to Texas, and yeah, I am happy to answer any and all questions that folks may have. So the report was The Power Behind AI. We released it on July 1st. It was trying to take stock of all the behind-the-meter gas power plants for data centers across the country. And just to take a quick step back, in case any of this is unclear to folks, the data centers and their power plants are 2 distinct things and issues. I'm sure a lot of folks know the problems that come with data centers. They take up huge amounts of land. They produce light pollution, noise pollution, infringe upon ecosystems. The only sources of real air pollution at a data center itself is usually an emergency engine. They can have hundreds of these depending on the size of the data center. These are things that kick in should they lose their electricity from a power plant grid, and those can be huge sources of air pollution. The power plant is a separate thing, right? these server racks, the data centers need electricity to come from somewhere so that they can keep the lights on, keep the server racks running. And data centers are being developed so fast and furiously across the country that they're often outstripping the ability of the local utility like Dominion, Duke Energy, in Texas, ERCOT, to provide them the electricity that they need to get their data center up and running when they want it. So increasingly, what we're seeing is a wave of gas power plants being proposed for data centers as a way around waiting on grid operators and traditional utilities. They just figured, why don't we just build the gas power plant ourselves? That I can't really tell you when that took off as an idea, but at least for the past year or so, it has kept me very busy trying to keep track of all of them. And just in case anyone didn't catch this earlier, these are called behind the meter power plants because the electricity from them isn't routed to these data centers through the electric grid first. Think of it as a direct line from this power plant to the data center, just bypassing the grid entirely. So that's what that means. So some brief overview of sort of the national findings of our report, and then I'll get into the Texas specific stuff. In just the year or so that I've been working on this, this comes from a database that we have called Oil and Gas Watch, where we track oil, gas, and petrochemical projects across the country. We eventually grew the database to include power plants because we were seeing so many of them, and I've been leading that ever since. So looking at just behind the meter power plants for data centers, because we have many more gas power plants on Oil and Gas Watch, we were able to identify at least 74. This is a dated figure now. We froze the data for this report at the end of April. I have some updated figures for you a little later on, but we were able to identify 74. That's a lot. That's just gas power plants for data centers behind the meter, not those that are being built to satiate expected increases in energy demand for data centers, just those that would serve behind the meter. In total, using all the information we got from air construction permit documents, state utilities, regional transmission operators, ISOs, we found that altogether they would be able to generate 143 gigawatts of electricity. So that's 143,000 megawatts, and 1 megawatt you can generally think of as enough to power about 250 residential customers. So that's a huge amount of electricity. So, like I said, Texas seems to be ground zero for this. This is a map that we put together for the report, highlighting Texas in particular because there were so many gas power plants being proposed in this state. Like I just said, we identified 74. 32 are in Texas, so just under half. As you can see, sort of the distribution from this map, a huge concentration in West Texas, but you also get a lot in Central Texas around Austin and San Antonio. And I'm probably going to repeat myself a bunch of times, but we know about more now. This report, when we released it, was a picture in time. That time really being the end of April, start of May, when we had finalized all the data. So what does this mean nationally for all of the 74 plants that we were able to identify across the country? Using information from air construction permit documents, either applications or final permits where companies or the state agencies like the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality will provide in those documents emissions estimates of sort of worst case operating scenarios. We took those when that was available, but these facilities are being proposed so quickly and so many of them, we didn't want to wait around until we could get our hands on those permit documents to try to provide sort of a full scope of the picture. So working with our engineers we have on staff at EIP, we came up with our own methodology for estimating emissions for criteria pollutants like carbon monoxide and things like that and greenhouse gases. So using information from permit documents and our own estimates, in total, we estimate that every year, if these 74 gas power plants were built, they would be able to emit up to 662 million tons of greenhouse gases. It sounds like a lot, but in case anybody wants some reference points to put that into perspective, that would be the same as 140 million cars and trucks driving for a year, or more than the entire nation of Australia emitted in, I think, 2023 was the most recent data we could get our hands on. So as much as an entire nation or a ton of cars. So that's a lot of pollution. Yeah, so what does that mean for Texas? Like I said, oh, and there's an asterisk here because I'm starting to update the data again, and we did find that one of the projects had been a duplicate because it was added so early on. So 32 in the report. I'm giving you the figures for 31 of the power plants. In Texas alone, our estimates show that these plants could emit 270 million tons of greenhouse gases every year, including nearly 20,000 tons of nitrogen oxides, which people might know can produce, it's a component of smog and it can cause lung damage, and over 13,000 tons of fine particulate matter, which can increase the risk of asthma and heart attacks. It's generally very dangerous for your lungs. It's so fine, it can get deep inside of your lungs and cause real respiratory damage. That's just greenhouse gases, nitrogen oxide, and fine particulate matter. There's many other pollutants, including hazardous air pollutants, that these plants would emit that would have implications for local air quality. And so for this webinar that we were doing tonight, I took a look at our data and where it is now. We now have up to 39 behind the meter gas power plants in Texas. So we've added 8 since we froze the data. We are probably missing some. This is a very busy industry. It's very hard to stay on top of. There are probably some on my work computer right now that I just haven't gotten around to adding yet, but I ran some of our estimates again, including these 8 additional behind the meter gas power plants. That would make 39 in total. It boosts the greenhouse gases to over 300 million tons a year, according to our estimates and estimates that we're able to get from permit documents. That would increase nitrogen oxides to over 21,000, nearly 22,000 tons every year, nearly 15,000 tons of fine particulate matter. It's a huge pollution load. It's a lot of gas power plants and it's a lot of pollution. And again, this is just gas power plants for data centers behind the meter. There's other power plants in Texas that are being proposed. I can tell you that. I see them every week. So this is just a subset, just to keep it into perspective for people. I didn't have time to rerun some of our demographic analysis for this webinar, but I'm sure a lot of folks on the call might know or suspect a lot of times these proposed gas power plants are being proposed in or near communities that are already facing disadvantages, be they economic, health, socioeconomic. Just for the report, we did some demographic analysis. We found that for 62 of the 70 gas power plants with known locations, life expectancy in the county it was planned in is already below the US average. At least nearly 200 schools were within 3 miles of one of the proposed gas power plants that we identified, right? We know that young people, children, adolescents are more susceptible to the harms of air pollution. So that's a particularly vulnerable population that could be exposed to these local pollutants. And again, about 40% of the people living within 3 miles of these plants are in low income households. So none of this might come as a terrible surprise, but we ran the numbers and did the math, and you know, it's not a terrible surprise where a lot of these gas power plants are being planned. Our main takeaway that we were hoping people would read the report and come away from is that this is no way to power a technology of the future. Love AI or hate AI, we are not a technological policy organization. If these changes in technology are needed to accommodate things like artificial intelligence and more data centers, gas power plants is the wrong way to go. It produces pollution, it can harm communities, it releases greenhouse gases. It's not a way to power the technology of the future, is what we were hoping to get people to come away from the report with. And for the report, we also have great communications people at EIP who did great local profiles of communities in Texas and beyond that are facing some of these proposed gas power plants and what they're doing to push back. I know we just heard from Joanne about some of the success they had in getting, I think it was the NRG Tolar power plant application pulled or withdrawn. So it can work. You know, we've seen communities do this successfully. The biggest gas power plant that I'm aware of in Texas is far and away Fermi America's Project Matador, better known as the President Donald J. Trump Advanced Energy and Intelligence Campus. That is the actual name that was given to this complex. It's not anything that I came up with. In If the facility is constructed fully, according to the permit applications that we've seen, it would comprise 90 gas turbines. That's what's already been approved. They've applied for 51 more, so over 140 gas turbines. In total, they'd be able to generate 11 gigawatts of electricity. That's more than enough to power all of New York City. It's the biggest proposed gas power plant that I'm currently aware of. That's an ever-changing statement, though. Everyone seems to be wanting that title, but at the moment, it's the biggest I know of. This single facility, according to the air permit application documents we've seen, could emit over 40 million tons of greenhouse gases every year. That's the equivalent of 8 million cars and trucks driving for a year. And our report didn't get into as much. We heard a little bit earlier about sort of the water impacts that come with data centers. They need to cool themselves. Power plants also need to use water to cool parts of the facility. It's worth noting that Project Matador is being planned in Amarillo, a city that's already plagued by drought, and the city council has approved selling up to 2.5 million gallons of water a day to this facility for up to 20 years. So it'd have significant environmental impacts all around. Yeah, we have some other communities that we've profiled here. Just know that as much as this is ground zero in Texas, communities all over the country are facing these issues and working to fight back. In Homer City, they're trying to convert what was a closed, or in Pennsylvania, they're trying to convert what was a closed coal-fired power plant to gas, 4 gigawatts for a data center. In West Virginia, they're trying to build a 1.6 gigawatt gas power plant in a county of just 7,000 people. I can't even tell you how many times over that would be able to power all the homes in that community, but it's a lot. Again, all for a data center. People might have heard about this. It's a pretty famous environmental justice fight that's kind of still ongoing. Elon Musk built a data center in South Memphis, Tennessee. Instead of getting a permit for building gas turbines to power it, he loaded a bunch of them on top of a flatbed truck and just parked it outside of the data center for a while. Eventually, that got stopped, and he had to apply for an air construction permit. And now he's looking to build an even bigger one just south of Memphis in Mississippi. So just know that you're not alone in facing these problems and these challenges. It's communities all over the country. And yeah, I hope that was helpful. I hope it was informative. Like I said, I'm happy to answer any and all questions, and I'll give my email in the chat or at the end of this in case people want to follow up with questions. But thanks so much to everyone for putting this together and giving me a chance to present some of our work.
Thank you very much, Griffin. Excellent work. I've appreciated that report, and I did put the link in the chat for those that are interested. For now, we're going to move on to Cyrus Reed, who is the Conservation Director for the Lone Star chapter of the Sierra Club. He's going to talk more about the impacts on the grid and some of the things that are being considered by ERCOT and the PUC and maybe the legislature. I'm not sure.
Yeah, can you guys see this?
Yep.
And can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, and I've got a new title, Kaiba. I'm Conservation and Legislative Director. I don't know what that means. I guess because I am one of those people who seem to spend hours waiting to testify for 2 minutes. And really great presentations, and congratulations, Joanne, for your victory. And it's, you know, it's not the end of it, but that's a great story. And Griffin, for your presentation. They're talking about this stuff right now, right? There's a big discussion about how we need all these data centers to bring their own generation. And when they say that, at least here in Texas, they tend to think of gas. And so we're very concerned about that. So I'm going to try to do very quickly. I think Kaiba told me 10 minutes. I've got 12 slides or so, but I'll move pretty quickly. And my email and my cell phone are there if you have questions. And I think they can share this presentation as well. Here's the question. How do I advance? Just a few reminders. Wanted to make sure everybody, you know, I think most people on this call know this, but we're pretty unique in Texas because we have our own grid, ERCOT, but we actually have 4 different grids that are occupied within Texas. So it makes things a little complex, a little complicated, but that's just our reality. And then just a reminder, the Public Utility Commission of Texas is the commission in charge of both our ERCOT electric grid, but also the other grids. There are 5 commissioners. There used to be 3 after Winter Storm Uri. They expanded it to, they fired all those folks. That's what happens in politics when something goes wrong. You fire the underlings and don't point at yourself. And then they named 5 new people. There's a new commissioner who just started about a month ago, Patrick Rode. But Thomas Gleason is the chair. He was here today speaking. And then ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, that is our main grid. There's a bunch of, board members, and Paul Foster, who's actually, I believe, lives in El Paso, but for some reason he's the chair of ERCOT's grid. And they changed a lot after Winter Storm Uri, but they still have a board. And at the end, they're answerable to the PUC. And as you all know, the PUC, their commissioners are named by the governor. So the governor, I guess, is, along with the legislature, is ultimately responsible. 2020, I was just here with Lila Castillo from Chispa, and she was asking me, when did we hear about this, all this new boom in AI and data centers? For me, it kind of happened a few years before when they started about, I used to run around with Adrian a couple sessions ago, and we were all concerned about crypto mines. That seems laughable now because we were concerned about, tens of megawatts of new crypto mines. And now we're talking about gigawatts of data centers. In 2024 and 2025, we started to see these huge projections of new loads coming to Texas. And just a few years ago, they were talking about, moving, we've heard figures like 400 gigawatts of new loads or 200 gigawatts of new loads, but we started to hear about it a few years ago. And a few years ago, they also started talking about the need for a huge new transmission system of 765 lines, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But just a lot of growth began to crop up, and they all seemed to be coming to Texas. I guess they came to Virginia first, and then they looked next on their list and they saw Texas. So that's what's been happening. This came out April 16th. ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, released some long-term demand projections. Now, they immediately said, we don't necessarily think these projections are true, but these are what we're seeing in the interconnection queue. Here's what people are telling us they want to build. And so they were saying the normal growth, if we're at about 90 gigawatts of peak power today, we think by 2031, without all those data centers and large and medium loads, we'd be for, normal growth would be about 108 gigawatts of power in 2031. But if you add in all those additional loads, that's 346 gigawatts of power needed. So basically, it's almost more or less quadrupling our load within 4 or 5 years. Now, again, ERCOT itself doesn't actually believe all these folks are going to come, and they basically have said, there's no way we could serve all these folks, right? But that is the speculation and the folks who say they want to come to Texas. And what this really means for all of us, this is a study that was done a year or so ago that said, ERCOT, we have actually fairly low electricity prices compared to a lot of the states, at least our wholesale electricity prices, not necessarily our transmission costs. But if we have a huge demand like that, we would have the highest electricity costs in the nation. If we had this huge expansion without some sort of controls. And then, we've had our friends at TEPRI. I can't remember what TEPRI stands for, but they look at energy burden and energy, basically poverty. And they've done some analysis saying, based on their analysis, electricity costs have already gone up about 30% over the last 5 years, and they're projecting another 30% increase in consumer costs. So this, whatever the air pollution issues or water issues or other issues, as an environmental organization that cares about affordability, we also need to be concerned about what your average ratepayer is going to be paying due to the expansion of all this load and all these data centers. On June 11th, and we know that we're in an election, And we know that because of all the pressure that you all are putting on our legislators, they are they're paying attention, right? They're listening. The governor, under this pressure, did send a letter to the PUC, and he said a number of things. He said, make sure that the data center interconnections will not only not lead to higher prices, but will actually reduce residential electric prices. I'm not sure how he's going to do that, but that's what he said in his letter. He said, take action, PUC, to make sure they pay for all their infrastructure costs. Review all your existing authority, see if you can safeguard Texans. And then he had some other proposals like, use recycled water, don't use once through cooling. And also, and this gets at the last presentation, bring your own power. That makes us pretty nervous. When you say bring your own power, in the governor's words, I think that means bring a gas plant is really what he means, I believe. So the governor did send the letter. The PUC responded and said, hey, we're doing all these things already, at least in ERCOT, or most of them, but we're going to need a little more authority from the legislature to do other things. And one of the reasons all of us are calling for a special session is if they need more authority to better protect us, and you have to wait till September of next year before any new law could take effect and wait for the regular session, that's almost too late with all this growth coming in. So that's a reason a lot of us are calling for either a moratorium or a special session, is because of just how quickly these data centers are expanded and trying to interconnect to our grid. There's a couple of, I don't know how deep Kaiba wants me to go, but there are a couple of things that did happen that you might have heard about. One is the PUC did approve some new guidance, basically, from ERCOT. It's called PIGR 145. It's basically sort of it's like a new rulemaking. And it basically said ERCOT is going to stop looking at these data centers, these large loads, one by one. They're going to do a whole study to look at what the needs are of the transmission system. And they're not going to take all of those folks who say they want to come to Texas. They're only going to take the folks that meet certain criteria, like they put some financial assurance down, they have some control of the site, and they identify who's actually going to be there. This isn't necessarily public information. They have it. And so what that means, instead of another 200 gigawatts of large loads, they're kind of studying 100 to 120 gigawatts of new loads. So I guess good news, not all, we're not going to interconnect 200 gigawatts of new load. We might only interconnect 100 based on the study, and probably it'll be less than that. So that was approved. The other thing that just happened is the PUC, and I think this is probably a good thing, the PUC approved a proposed rule about how we pay for the transmission costs. And basically, in Texas, we've always socialized transmission costs, and we've always had everybody pay based on what's called 4CP, 4 coincidence peak, which are your summer months. That is really good for large industrial loads because they know how to game the system and not pay for it by coming off during those times. That means the rest of us get stuck with that bill to pay for transmission. They've approved a rule that is actually fairly good, and it would move to what's called 12 CP, but also have a minimum demand charge on all large loads. That means they'll pay for more of the transmission system. Doesn't mean our bills won't go up. They'll still go up. They just won't go up as much under this rule. So we're urging folks we do have an action alert up, and we're urging people to both support the rule, but also hopefully strengthen it. And then there's also another rule out on how large loads can be paid to come off when we have emergencies. And, depending on your perspective, it's basically paying rich data centers more to come off when we have a grid crisis. So that's either a good thing or a bad thing, depending on your perspective. All of this comes out of SB 6. I want to be clear, SB 6 is very much a compromise bill. It doesn't stop any development. It just puts some guardrails around this large load development. I don't need to go into all these things, but they're working on 2 of the rules have been approved. 2 of them are still, and then 3 are still open and haven't been approved yet. 2 of them are open for public comment. One of them, we're just kind of waiting to see what they do. But they're they're all about, putting some cost share and predictability about these new loads. So I guess it's better than nothing. We did support the bill as opposed to doing nothing, but it surely doesn't, protect us as consumers or obviously as people who breathe dirty air from whatever they build to power their data centers. This goes into way more details on what those 5 rulemakings are. Again, I'll share this presentation. You can just click on that link and it'll take you to the interchange at the PUC where they keep all the comments. And then, well, this is basically me saying it doesn't go far enough. SB 6 only looks at those loads that are 75 megawatts or more. It doesn't look at what you would call medium loads and protect us from those. They had an initial idea to charge people at least $100,000 per megawatt for their interconnection fee. They've now put that down to $50,000. There is no real specific tariff that is required other than on transmission costs. So other costs could be borne by the rest of us. And there's no attention to water use or pollution impacts or land use. And that's why, and in the meantime, they have approved this Permian Basin Reliability Plan and a enhanced transmission plan that involves a bunch of 765 lines. They're saying 33 billion. I mean, I guess my main point here is not that Sierra Club is against 765 lines if they're needed, but I want to be clear that the vast majority of this is for oil and gas, data centers, hydrogen ammonia facilities, crypto mines. It's not really for us, right? It's being built for those industries. And so some of that cost will go on to residential consumers, and that's a big concern. And it is being done in a very rushed process. Do we need all these lines? We may need some of them, but the process has been pretty unfair to folks, and that's why there were over 200 folks who signed up, because they're approving these lines in 180 days with very limited ability to do cross-examination or to get involved in those contested case hearings. So it's kind of a broken system. It needs to be fixed. We'll see what happens with all the pressure on the legislature. So how do you get engaged? There are 2 PUC rulemakings open for comment. We have an action alert on one of them on the transmission cost. And, a bunch of us are calling for a special session, but ultimately it's probably going to be the 27 legislative session where we need to deal with a lot of these safeguards. Sierra Club has a number of proposed solutions. One is we should have separate tariffs for all large loads so we don't bear those costs. We should require them to annually report on their water and energy use. We should eliminate non-disclosure agreements. We should have some standards on water and energy use. And we should have a mitigation fee. If they're going to interconnect to Texas, they should pay extra that can then go into things like energy savings programs, expanded county authority, and obviously we need some air quality standards for all this generation because it's poisoning our local communities. So that was a lot to do, and I don't know how many minutes that was, Kaiba, but I'll stop there. And then my email's there, and that's my office number, but I can also give you my cell phone number.
Thank you very much, Cyrus. That was excellent. All right, we will take a few questions, and folks are welcome to use the Q&A feature, or you can raise your hand. If you click on the little heart that says react, you'll see a raise your hand option. I'm happy to take questions that way as well. I see you, Rebecca, or Becky. Yeah, do you want to ask your question live?
I'm not sure if non-panelists are able to unmute themselves. Let me see if I can unmute.
Okay. All right, try now. I think you should be able to speak.
I think I can speak. So I wanted to ask specifically, and this is a question about Texas Physicians for Social Responsibility, but also concerned healthcare professionals around the state. where are the gaps that it would be useful for the healthcare community to learn more about sort of how to describe the health impacts of data centers for communities and give them useful resources for advocacy. I'm working on a webinar that I think would just focus on noise pollution and air pollution as sort of the two biggest health risks. But I want to make it as useful as possible for non-clinicians.
Griffin, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, it's a good question. It sounds like, Rebecca, maybe part of your question is how can you sort of connect the dots for people who might not otherwise see the linkages between these data centers and air pollution? Was that part of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a lot of people in Texas who are just really concerned about the data centers, but they don't know a lot. And there are so many different aspects of the problem to focus on. And I'm just trying to figure out, and I will crunch on this longer, how we can both help medical professionals be more effective advocates for restrictions and limitations. And also, how we can help everyday Texans understand, if you have asthma, this is what this means. Or, I feel like air pollution in particular, it can be pretty hard to quantify the relative impact on people based on where they are and where their family is currently in terms of their health.
Sure. So I'm afraid I can't really speak to how to specifically tailor this advice to medical professionals. It's a great question. I just don't have a ton of experience with that. But the other half of your question, I think educating people as to what the disparate components of this build out is, right? Like I kind of tried to talk about before, the data centers are one thing, and where they're going to get the electricity from is a whole other thing. People are often concerned about the data centers because that's what you tend to hear about. You see these giant warehouse-sized facilities, multiple football fields that are going to go up next to your house. And I think that kind of makes it concrete in a way. Most of them look ugly. If you drive by one, they are loud. They have light pollution at night from floodlights for security and things like that. The air pollution part of the equation is just a little harder to hit home. I feel like it always has been. I tend to think a really good tool in trying to drive that home for people, even though the data center itself might not be a comparatively huge amount source of air pollution compared to like the power plant up the road that's going to provide electricity, when those emergency generators kick in, at a hyperscale data center, there can be hundreds of them. These are often diesel fired. Diesel fired generators are dirtier per megawatt than gas. They produce large amounts of particulate pollution, particulate matter. So there are really striking photographs that you can find of when the grid goes down, when the lights go off in your house, if the grid goes down, hundreds of these generators kick on at once, because for these data centers to deliver what they're promising, they can't have any loss of power. It looks like a swarm of birds or bugs. It's shocking when people see it. And some of these pollutants you might not be able to smell, you might not be able to taste, you might not be able to identify, right? Odds are there's some people that haven't heard of volatile organic compounds, but I live outside DC and Virginia. I'm sure people heard about the Canadian wildfires that were happening, maybe still happening, but the smoke came through the Midwest and parts of the Northeast. We got it here. At the same time, Data Center Alley is not far from where I live. Terrific photos in the Washington Post of thousands of diesel generators kicking in at once because they needed excess power because it was also hot outside. I mean, it looks apocalyptic. So maybe that's a way to sort of try to drive it home for people that, not only is there this massive power plant a couple miles away from you that you might be able to understand is producing all this air pollution, but if this comes next to you, these data centers, you're going to see it. You might not now, but if it loses electricity, you will see the air pollution. It's unmistakable. That's the best shot I got. It's a great question. I don't know that anyone has an answer to it.
Thank you, Griffin. I do want us to move into our training, but I'm going to let Steve, if you can ask your question succinctly, and then hopefully we can get a quick response. And then I would encourage Cyrus, Joanne, Griffin, all of y'all can respond to questions in the Q&A that we're asked in writing, and everybody can see the responses there. So, Steve, if you want to ask your question.
How come renewable and battery sources aren't more the conversation on either our side or theirs? Is it just nostalgia for legacy polluting sources of power?
I think it kind of depends on the data center. So I don't know if they're a good company or not. I'm not opining on them, but Google did announce today that they're as part of their commitment to Texas, they're bringing wind, solar, and battery storage, basically extra capacity to make up for the energy that they're going to use, or they'll have power purchase agreements with those. So I think some companies are doing that. But a lot, as we know from the example earlier today, like NRG, are not. So I think public pressure can make a difference with those companies to, encourage them to use cleaner forms. But at least here at the Capitol, what I'm hearing today is everyone's talking about we need them to bring gas plants. So whether that's going to be a requirement or not in the future, I don't know. But that's what's being talked about here.
Can I take a crack at that too, really quick? Because it's a great question.
Yeah, real quick.
Yeah, so data centers are graded on a tier system of what they provide. It's called uptime, how much of the percentage they guarantee that they will be able to provide you compute services. And, there's this view that these gas-fired turbines are better at doing that. I'm not an electrical engineer, but a lot of these plants that are gas power plants are also building in secondary battery and energy storage systems. So they obviously believe in them to some degree. And they're able to get these online faster because it is a legacy technology. There's more of a system with it. But as more of these power plants get built, they're having to devolve to dirtier gas turbines from something called a combined cycle turbine to simple cycle. So it's a great question, and there's a lot of different facets to it.
All right, I think we could keep talking on this topic for a while, but we're gonna move over to Jose Medina, who's our press officer in the Public Citizens Texas office, and he's gonna do a little training on how to write an LTE. And yeah, I'm gonna turn it over to him now. And if y'all want to respond to any other questions in the chat, please feel free.
Hey everyone, how are you? Give me one sec to get set up here. Kaiva, is it visible? Excellent. Hey everyone, so as Kaiva said, I'm Jose Medina. I'm the press officer for the Texas Office of Public Citizen. I've been here for a little bit more than 4 years, and I handle all the communications for our office. So anytime you see any sort of communication from us, whether it's on social media, an email alert, it usually goes through me. First of all, thank you for all the work you've been doing, not only this week, but back in your communities. I know it's a really important issue, especially this year. So I wanted to give a little presentation on letters to the editor. Your advocacy, of course, is important in the halls of power and your local city halls at the Texas Capitol. But you can also advocate in the court of public opinion, and that's what I'm here to explain. How there's a simple way to get your viewpoint into the public, and that's the letters to the editor. So what is a letter to the editor? It's a letter to the editor is a short communication to a newspaper, magazine, or other publication to express an opinion, respond to a news article, or highlight an issue of public concern. It's, like I said, it's a simple, quick way to express your viewpoint and get it out into the public. Sure, social media is there, but we also have this other tool that's still around, and we should be able to use it. Now, as we know, traditional media has been a little bit of a decline, but letters to the editor still matter. Some publications have pulled back and no longer feature them. Other ones have de-emphasized, opinion pages, that kind of thing. But they still matter. They still get read. They still get read by decision makers or their staffs, elected officials, or their staffs who keep an eye on those things just to take the pulse of a local community. And they carry a bigger impact in smaller publications like your local small town newspaper. There's cities, large cities like Houston and Dallas have many ways to share public information and local news, but your local newspaper still remains, in some places, the only source of local news, so they still matter. The other reason why they matter is that they put a human face to the issue. Somebody who has skin in the game, somebody who is in that community. Myself, I get paid to do this, but you all, you're just doing this because it's important to your community. It's important to me too, but I get paid to do it. But you guys actually live in these communities that are going to be heavily impacted. So you have skin in the game, so it gives you more standing to speak out about these issues. And it can help shape a publication's news coverage. And that brings us to this. This is one of the biggest examples of a letter to the editor influencing a publication's news coverage. You might have heard this phrase, "Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus." The backstory to this is in 1897, so we're going back way back. This little 8-year-old girl named Virginia wrote to the Sun newspaper in New York City to ask a simple question. "Dear editor, I am 8 years old. Some of my little friends say there is no Santa Claus. Papa says if you see it in the sun, it's so. Please tell me the truth. Is there a Santa Claus?" So the editor very kindly responded with this column, very sweet column, assuring this little girl that yes, in fact, Santa Claus does exist. So this is one of the most famous examples of a letter to the editor, a simple 100 and so words, even shorter in this case, influencing an editor to take an action. A more recent example, this is something that we helped place about a month ago. This was written by my colleague, Didi Belmares, who is our organizer in San Antonio. It's a letter responding to CPS Energy, what they've, their leadership search. It did get a response, not a public response, but it did get a response from leadership at CPS Energy. So this again is an example of where a letter to the editor in 150 words or less was able to get a response from decision makers. And now you might be asking, why not an op-ed? Why not write it for a full article? The simple question is just length and time. A letter to the editor is much less time consuming. Like I mentioned, there are generally like 150 to 200 words, depending on the publication. A letter to the editor is obviously, for that reason, far easier and faster to craft and place it in a newspaper. Conversely, op-eds are, like I said, longer. They're like 600-700 words, 800 words in some cases, and a very small percentage of them actually get published, in part because newspapers do actually have space constraints. Now, to the actual nuts and bolts of a letter to the editor. Like I said, keep it short. Most publications cap letters to the editor at around 150 to 200 words. Didi's letter, which you saw in an earlier slide, was about 165, but the San Antonio Express News just let it fly. So we got lucky in that case. So please try to stick to those limitations. But of course, you might be able to work with an editor that will let you have a little bit more space. If relevant, when you write your letter to the editor, reference the article you are responding to. Sometimes you can write a letter to the editor for whatever reason you want, but you have a better chance of getting it published if you are reacting to something that the newspaper covered in previous days. Keep it to only a main point and a couple of facts of two. You don't have space to get into much of anything else. Avoid getting personal in those letters. If you get personal, it's highly likely you won't get your letter published. And always include a call to action. In this case, you're probably going to be asking for something like, we want a moratorium. We want our water protected. We want our local leaders to reject this new project that's coming into town. Oops, sorry, skip one. Pitching. This is, industry speak for actually submission. That's another word we use for submission. So publications will usually have their guidelines on their website. They'll tell you the length, what type of letter they'll accept, what they'll consider, how to submit it, and any other guidelines the publication might have. Now, if you're reacting to our article, speed is key. You have to submit it within 1 or 2 days, or at least I recommend doing that within 1 or 2 days of the article's publication in order for it to get a chance to still be published because it's still relevant at that point. And finally, did your letter to the editor get published? That's excellent. Share it in any other way you can. If you have social networks, the letter to the editor will be published in that publication. But if you have other ways to get more eyeballs on it, that's always awesome. So in closing, the 150-word letter can influence decision makers' public opinion and publications coverage. Pick a relevant topic of public concern or an article that appeared in a newspaper, and don't forget the call to action. So as I mentioned, that's just a quick, easy presentation on what you can do to get a letter to the editor published. And like I said, this is one of the we have plenty of tools to communicate, plenty of ways to shape public opinion, but this is just another easy way that's available to you. And I really, really, really encourage you to take advantage. My contact info is there. If you need help with one, I am happy to help. If you have patience with me, I might be busy, but if you want me to help with your letter to the editor, either with actually writing it, whether you want edits or you want help in getting it placed, I'm happy to help. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you, Jose. And I can attest that Jose is really helpful when it comes to connecting with members of the press and helping with edits on writing for press materials as well. So take him up on that offer. Does anybody have questions for Jose? All right, just a second. I see your hands. I'm moving you over. Jose, do you want to maybe take down your screen so we can see a little
Oh,
better?
I'm still sharing. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. Okay, I think, Pat, you should be able to ask your question. They might be having a technical difficulty there. Well, while we're waiting for that one, there was another question in the Q&A that we didn't get to before, and I don't know if anybody has an answer to this, but Darby asked, are any states looking to tax the huge profits of these centers? I know that's something being discussed at the federal level, but does anybody know that? All right, Pat, if you can speak, you're up. Maybe not. All right, it looks like Lisa has a question. Go ahead.
I posted it in the Q&A, but I don't think you saw it. So do you know, in general, what percentage of letters to the editor actually get published? Are they flooded with letters and it's a small percentage, or they don't get very many and they publish a high percentage of the ones they get?
That's a good question. I can't give you a percentage. I can tell you anecdotally over the time that I've been doing this work, either Public Citizen or the other organizations that I've worked at, we've had an easier time of getting a letter to the editor placed, just for the simple fact that, like I mentioned earlier, they're smaller. They can get 3 or 4 published in one day, a newspaper can, as opposed to, a full editorial, which takes up a lot more space, and they get also bombarded with those opinion pieces from people like me and politicians, et cetera, and so on. So I don't have a specific percentage for you, but I can tell you, like I said, anecdotally, it's been an easier lift for us.
Thank you.
Good question. All right. Well, thank you all for your great presentations and for the great engagement from everybody. I do encourage you to follow up with any questions from any of our presenters this evening, and we will be sharing out the recording as well as the slides. We'll probably do that after the last one, which is tomorrow. And for anybody who wants to join tomorrow, we'll be talking about the a process for finding out about permits at the TCEQ, tracking them, and contesting them as well. And for anybody who needs it, I'm just putting the Data Center Week of Action link in the chat again, where you can get to that registration link as well as all the other actions. And I do encourage you to send those emails as well to the governor asking for a special session, as well as to the 2 different committees that have been taking testimony this week. Thank you all.